This episode is brought to you by Hasa. Liquid is clearly better. Liquid chlorine is the highest purity, works immediately, has no added cyanuric acid or calcium, and it will leave your pool safe, clean, and clear. And by the Bottom Feeder professional grade battery powered vacuum system. It sucks to clean pools, so cleaning pools sucks less. Get $100 off with code DVB100.
This episode is brought to you by Skimmer, the #1 pool service software in North America. With Skimmer, you can streamline your schedule, grow your revenue, and keep your customers coming back with 5-star service. Whether you're a one-person operation or an established team, Skimmer is your partner in success. Visit getskimmer.com/poolguy to try Skimmer for free for 30 days.
The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show.
Hi, welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. In this podcast, I will be joined again by Sean Reardon of UPA for part 2 of our talk about liability insurance, or I should say general liability insurance for your pool business. He's going to share with you the 3 top claims that UPA gets and ways to avoid that. And of course, getting the insurance is something that should be on the top of your mind after listening to this podcast. So before we get into it, I'm going to go ahead and run their little ad that I have here with their rates, so you can kind of see that it's extremely logical, of course, to sign up with UPA insurance as soon as possible. If you don't have general liability insurance already, or if you want to switch providers, it's definitely going to save you a lot of money to go with UPA over other insurance providers, and you can get the information again in this little blurb I'm going to put here at the beginning. And the Pool Guy Podcast Show has teamed up with UPA to bring you affordable, reliable liability insurance starting at just $64 a month. Get up to $2 million in coverage, and the members of my coaching group get an even lower rate. Protect your business and your peace of mind. Sign up with UPA today by clicking the link in the podcast description. And to learn more about my coaching group, go to poolguycoaching.com.
But because I'm now 50, I do want to share my memory only holds about 3 topics. And the major themes, David, that we see on the claim side are water damage, concrete stains, and really water chemistry issues. Mm-hmm. And so I'll start with the water damage, if that's okay.
Sure.
So yeah, water damage for us, and this has gone back since I've been working with the United Pool Association. We go through our claims every quarter with the board, and it, without fail, about 80% of the dollars paid out in claims are due to water damage. And what historically that had been was adding water to pools. And everybody who's listening, or not everybody, but probably a lot of the listeners are going, well, I always, I add water, but my keys are on the hose bib. I know. And without fail, there's a, they've got a spare set of keys under their, visor. You get distracted, there's cell phone calls, whatever. But we had a large amount of folks that, and understandably, I think a lot of people who get in this business are there. They want to run a business, obviously, but you want to help, and so you see the water low, you don't want the equipment to get damaged, so you start adding the water, and so they drop a hose in, and of course then you forget about it, and just the water finds its lowest path, which inevitably is in the living room. And so we had a situation not too long ago where it was a good-sized property down Southern California. The pool was at elevated level. The pool tech noticed it was low. He added the hose in. I forgot about it, left. Now, the homeowners were out of town. They didn't come back till 5 days later. And so what basically had happened was the pool overflowed. The flow of water had actually backed into, they had one of those kind of 4-foot retaining walls, that kind of snap-in retaining walls. Pushed that out, all of the basically mudslide down into the homeowner's tennis court. And so we ended up with this just god-awful looking tennis court at the end. The claim could have been a lot worse. Your imagination could go, what if it was a house down there? What if, whatever could happen? It ended up being a $50,000 claim, a lot of cleanup. But, one of the things to highlight in these situations is and I remember you had a episode on customer retention, I think, or And I'll tell you, 90% of the time, you have a claim, even if it's not your fault, the customer is likely going to blame you. And and it ends up in that account, whether the pool technician just fires them because they don't want to deal with them anymore, or more often the technician or the homeowner says, hey, look, no, thank you. I don't want to deal with this anymore. And they hire somebody new. So there's always that downside too of having a claim. Another water damage one, if I could share with you, and this happened. We've had quite a few of these where you have elevated situations where you have a rooftop spa. So we had this really nice house down in Newport Beach. It's this fancy developer who was sitting on his $20 million house. Our tech went out, noticed the spa was low, opened the fill valve, left it open, and ended up the water got in. The homeowner's maid or somebody had caught it, and was able to basically shut stuff off, but the water had already drained. And this is an insurance broker's nightmare, by the way, when you have a huge, expensive house where God knows what kind of art. You can only imagine the worst, right? And it ended up being the nicest homeowner. He's been through a lot of insurance matters. I can only imagine. And it ended up only costing us about $5,000. But this is very unusual because it's usually the opposite effect. It's usually people try to really get what they can out of this. But these rooftop situations, though, are really scary. And you can only imagine the higher up the actual water source is, the more catastrophic the damage can get. Which brings me to a third one. We had a apartment complex down in Long Beach that was on the 8th floor. And this one, and I really just call it dumb luck, but our technician was basically hired in to drain the pool. And so he was brought in, got escorted up to the top of the pool. He couldn't find a drain to run the water. So he had to actually get the on-site manager up there to actually point out where to direct this. So in our fortune, the property had actually directed our technician of what to do, and so our guy had basically ran his pump through the drain trap that they had up on the 8th floor, and it had gone down, and there must have been compromise on the way down. So it ended up in 5 different units, and so it turned out being a pretty significant claim. But because of the sort of, not to bore everybody, but the laws in California as far as responsibility goes, we were able to get off pretty inexpensively only because our guy was directed on what to do. Had that not happened and our guy had done what a lot of folks do and just, hey, found something, we would have ate that whole, I mean, it was up above $500,000 of damage. So it was a very significant. And what I really like to point out in these situations, and you know better than I do, but it's risk management, right? It's going into these situations going, gosh, I'm getting paid $500, $1,000 to do this. Is this worth the risk? And when you're up 8 stories high, that question should be flying through your head. Like, what could happen here? And it doesn't take a creative person to figure out all of these scenarios that could go wrong there. But we try to get our guys. We have drain waivers. We try to really push our guys to use, and it's really about education, right? For the homeowner. If you in a lot of situations you're draining these pools, you don't know what their plumbing looks like. You don't know. You half the time probably don't even know where their sewer clean out is. Even throw it out there. And many of these cities, municipalities have different codes on what you can do. And sometimes you can't even use the sewer clean out. Sometimes you have to deactivate the actual water and run it down the street. All of these unknowns are what it makes this so challenging of a job. And as much of that burden you can put on the actual homeowner, which rightfully is where it belongs, is very helpful. These water damage ones, I think are really important to highlight because they're the ones that have the biggest dollar amount. And what I would also what I also kind of point out, what we've been doing with the United Pool Association is really trying to shift that paradigm, to where and I could think back 5 years ago, the pushback that our pool techs would say, "Hey, look, we have to add the water. I mean, it's they're not going to add the water." And so it got going. Well, we have one of the gentlemen in the UPA. He said, "Well, look, you think the landscapers taking in the garbage? You think what's all why this feeling of you have to do all of this stuff, and just because it's tangentially related, you're only at that pool for 15, 20 minutes a week." It's how much ownership of the water do you really want to take? Over the years, we've been able to shift that. We actually even gave guys flyers, and basically saying, look, if you don't want to have the conversation with your homeowner, show them this. And we give them out and just say, look, because of insurance reasons, we can't have the water. And it's so funny because 10 years ago, people would have looked at you side-eyed and go, what do you mean insurance reasons? Nowadays, everybody's so used to insurance companies being terrible that they go, oh, of course, David, I understand. Those insurance companies. But getting away from the responsibility of adding the water, because once you set that precedent, it's on you. Hey, David, you've been adding the water for the past 5 months, and so why didn't you do it now? Why are you stopping now? That kind of thing. So I feel like successfully moved it, and I respect the fact it's difficult in different areas. I mean, obviously you get evaporation in hotter areas. So if you look up in Bakersfield during the summer, it's you can lose a lot of water very quickly. Texas, various areas where you have that challenge. But I think the point still remains. It's a liability that, just from a business risk standpoint, insurance aside, just business risk, not a good use of time, not a good use of liability. The water damage ones, again, I think, to break it down, two situations. One is adding water in the pool. Just, if you can get out of it, don't do it. It never ends well. I mean, maybe you get a high five. Hey, thanks, David, for filling that pool, occasionally, but nobody's, you're not getting a huge benefit out of that, but there's a significant downside. Now, the second piece of that is removing the water, and that can be a little more complicated. And that's where I think trying to get the belts and suspenders, so using a drain waiver of some kind, that educates the homeowner. Hey, I don't know what your plumbing looks like. I don't know where am I able to drain to your sewer? They should be informing you of that. Now, look, I know a lot of your guys are very educated, savvy in their locations, but we have a lot of guys that cross cities. So it's, you're keeping track of so much. And so it's just, again, an education. Nothing's foolproof. And I speak in California only because I'm here, but this is it constantly falls into either the top three most litigious hellholes. So we've got more lawyers than we have anybody else. But it's so you can always get sued for something going wrong. But as much as you can button that up, the better. So the drain waiver and just being aware, educating the homeowner. Hey, there's a pump here. This is how you shut it off. I'm not going to hang out at your pool for a day while this drains. So you got to have somebody here, and part of at least the waiver that our UPA folks, a lot of them use, has a hold harmless portion of that, to where, hey, we're not responsible. Again, is it foolproof? No, but it does help significantly.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the water damage theme. Is that?
Yeah, I think the water damage is key. It's hard to tell, again, guys, not to do this. And the key trick does have fail points, like you mentioned. And I think one thing that I've found to be successful is I just hound the customer, educate them. I take pictures of their pool when it's low in water, send it to them. I tell them I can install a pool sentry. It's ugly, it goes on the deck, but it's going to keep the pool water filled for you relatively safely. And those kind of things take the burden off of you as the pool pro. Again, it's one of those things where we're in the service industry. I don't know. We're kind of codependent a little bit, by nature. We want to be as helpful as possible, get those Boy Scout badges, but that could lead to something that puts you out of business.
100%. 100%. Yeah, those are the big ones.
Yeah. So let's talk about the chemical spills, which I've unfortunately had the privilege of doing myself. And the Pool Guy Podcast Show has teamed up with UPA to bring you affordable, reliable liability insurance starting at just $64 a month. Get up to $2 million in coverage, and the members of my coaching group get an even lower rate. Protect your business and your peace of mind. Sign up with UPA today by clicking the link in the podcast description.
It's purely, I mean, obviously it's never intentional. It's purely just oversight, but it just can be so catastrophic nowadays. And the reason I say that is just the amount of fancy stained concrete, just stamped concrete. You look at pavers that are out of circulation, so you can't get the same paver colors anymore. These claims never end well, and it's something as simple. I know not all of your listeners use the carts, but in Southern California, pretty much everybody has a cart in the back of their truck. They wheel that cart back into the pool area, and if it's not hosed down right, that muriatic, you get some little splotches, and all of a sudden their brand new fancy looking deck has got these splotches on there, and there's no fix. I mean, it's, you could try to do whatever you can, but it never ends up the way it was before you did that little oopsies. And of course the repairs in these situations can be, awfully expensive. And I'll share a story with the group. We had one not too long ago, Southern California. They had a very impressive 50 to 75-foot driveway that was stained concrete, and our tech had somebody covering his pool for him, and so he didn't really know the property that well, but he had taken his truck, drove it up the driveway. So he got up there and he opened the bed of his truck, and you can only imagine. So once the bed truck opened, a jug of acid fell, and it just did what it did on a slope, and it rolled all the way down that nice driveway. So this turned into a really tricky claim, because insurance companies, and this is probably worth highlighting, we're talking about a general liability policy for everybody that's listening. And so these policies are really geared to protect you for bodily injury and property damage you negligently caused to others. So it's, so the agreement is really between you, the pool tech, and your insurance company. The claimant who you damage is going after you, and hence going after your insurance company. So it's adversarial in nature. So they're going after your insurance policy. So it automatically, the posture is one of defense. It's one of, hey, the insurance company's looking at this. Were you really responsible for this? And if you were, how do we get out of this, in the most reasonable way that is not, going to be the most expensive way? And that's usually the rub, because people generally want their stuff to be exactly the way it was before you caused the problem. And it generally never happens that way. And that's because, as everybody knows, concrete, you can't, there's no time machine. You can't go back and make it the way it was unless you completely redo it. And so what ultimately happened on this driveway, it was $90,000, which I was blown away. I remember when the claim adjuster was calling me, freaking out, saying, "I thought this was a driveway." And I said, "It was. It was just a very nice driveway." and so we ended up having to pay this, but it highlighted some really good practices. And actually, it was really I felt bad for our tech, because he said, "Look, my guys know, like, they do not drive on the driveway. And this is, and he made it for obvious reasons. Look, we're obviously concerned about acid or, chemical spills, but I don't want oil. I don't want anything. I don't want any sort of problem where our guy bumps their garage door." And so it was just one of these things that, had the guy, and I get it, it's a 50, 75-foot hike. Nobody wants to do that either uphill, but when you go up and you take this risk on, that's what can happen. So So that one, I highlight that one just because it was a big one, and it was contentious. The homeowner wasn't happy because the initial offers were not satisfactory. And this is also worth highlighting, David. The insurance companies, they don't go out and fix this stuff, right? So what happens at the end of these claims is if you're found liable and the damages are established, the insurance company writes a check. They send a check to the homeowner, and and for a lot of us, hey, great, I got a $90,000 check. What do I do? Who am I calling to get my drive? So it creates this other administrative headache for the claimant. So and this is probably adds to that what I mentioned earlier and what you were highlighting in your earlier episode, that these tend to often end up in the tech getting fired, and it's just because of the headaches. And it's nothing to do with the tech beyond just causing the incident, but it's the insurance process is not a fun process, and my job, I try to help usher our techs through that process, because I know you highlighted it too, but communication is so important. Trying to keep that communication line open, and so we try to do our best in that. So the other ones are a little less, I think alarming, but they are more common, and those are the ones that by the deck. And and I know you've talked about this in the past, but these are the ones where you're opening the jug and you're not over the water. You get a little splatter on the deck, and we end up with probably one or two of those every year. It's we try to get our guys to not move as quick, but everybody's moving quickly, and so it's a challenge. And and I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier on the risk management side, right? If you go in and the guy's deck looks absolutely horrendous, you're probably just going to go, hey, I'm not going to be overly concerned. I'll move at my quick rate, But if you go in there and you could eat off that deck and it's brand new, that's where your kind of spidey senses should be going up and going, all right, let's be extra cautious here.
I had one of my pool guys in my group. He took over this new pool, brand new pool, built beautiful stained concrete, and the homeowner left those little blue booties by the entrance of the pool. And he's like, "Can you wear these every time you service the pool?" And that for him was like, okay, I'm leaving everything in my truck. I'm gonna take things piecemeal there. Nothing's gonna go on this deck. It was really funny. So that was a good giveaway that yes, you don't want to spill nothing on this customer's deck.
No, absolutely. And that's on the concrete side. You mentioned I think you mentioned the water chemistry as well. And that was the third issue we see very commonly. And this one is tougher, as your listeners know better than I do, honestly.
Yeah.
It's and I'll put the startups aside, but really just the servicing of the pools. When you're in there, it's plaster. I'll speak of plaster. It for lack of a better way of putting it, it's effectively alive. So you have this sort of constantly changing surface that is constantly exposed to a changing environment, and obviously the job of the pool tech is to make sure that environment is as stable as possible. And most our guys, I can say, do this very well. We do a very big amount of education. I say this, the United Pool Association, does a very large amount of education to its members as far as, hey, how to manage the LSI, how to kind of make sure things are the way they should be in a way that's not going to cripple your business spending 3 hours at a pool every stop. So it's how to do it correctly but efficiently. And where we tend to go wrong is that some of these older pools, they get etched, they get scaled, and a lot of times it's just fault of the pool tech just overlooked, didn't maybe got sloppy, maybe it was just too much tabs, not enough actually paying attention to where the chemistry actually was. But there's a lot of situations where our guys are going, look, I tested every week, and so the next question is always, well, hey, what do those records look like? Do you have anything you can show me that you've actually been doing this? It's like, no, Sean, I don't. But I can tell you, I remember it being, the pH was at, 6.4. It was, I had calcium heart, all this stuff, but you don't remember, it's all in his memory. He doesn't really remember. And of course, can you imagine you're handling 75 pools? How you really remembering this? So just the logs. And so we try to emphasize to these guys, hey, like keep the records. I know you mentioned Skimmer. It's great product, just if there's, and what a great way to show, your value that you're doing to these homeowners, when you have a app like that to, push notifications. But at a minimum, just keep the logs of what you're doing. And so we end up in these situations. We had one not too long ago where it was exactly this. It was adamant that that he was managing the water chemistry appropriately. And the crazy thing is the cost of now actually having to replaster a pool. And, and that's the way these tend to go is, when you overly etch the pool, it's no longer sanded down. We can try and acid wash. We can try and do whatever we can to remedy this little portion. It's now turned into situations where you're basically replastering the pool. And this used to be an $8,000 claim.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, 25,000-gallon pool. I mean, it's $25,000, to get this done. I mean, it's astronomical. That's probably why we see a lot more of techs trying to get into the building side of things, just because of the crazy inflation on getting a pool built. But these claims have become very expensive. And again, these claims ultimately end up in the firing of the pool tech, because now you're talking about, the pool getting redone. And, God forbid the timing is going to overlap into summer, the homeowner's out of their pool for, the time they're going to want to be using their pool to get it redone. But so just recently, this one was about 25 grand. And of course it did end that way where he ended up getting let go. Also, I would add to this that the equipment, right? The water chemistry obviously impacts the equipment as well. And so we oftentimes will see with the heaters, the heat exchanger failures, and it's the same conversation, where, hey, were you managing this right? And most of the time it's a smoking gun. You got holes in that exchanger, it's leaking, and it's hard to argue. And what tends to happen, the flow is if it's a relatively new exchanger, they typically have a warranty, right? So they get so whoever it is, Pentair gets a warranty rep out there, and one of the first things that warranty guy's doing, wild guess,
Check the chemistry.
right?
Yeah.
So what if you were there, last Thursday? It's been 6 days since you were at that pool, and he goes out and tests that. Whoops, you can only imagine what that water chemistry is going to look like, so there goes that warranty. It ends up landing on the pool tech, the majority of the time. But it's a tough job. I mean, again, I think this is one of the hardest of the trades, having to manage all this. And the water chemistry is definitely one of those things that it's difficult to do it consistently, but it's the job, it needs to be done.
So I'm going to say this, like, in a perfect world, and this is like a lot of circular logic, no pool techs would fill the customers' pools. No one would spill acid on the deck, and no one would have an unbalanced pool. And of course that doesn't happen because this is real life here. And the UPA insurance is there for this reason. That's why it's general liability insurance. And it's not to protect you from not to say that you can be careless out there, and because you're damaging the industry, you're damaging the insurance group as well. I think we should emphasize that too, that rates are tied to claims. If more people have claims with UPA insurance, the rates are going to go up. Is that a correct kind of way things work in the insurance business?
It's a correct statement. And we've seen this with some of our, counterparts out there. One of the things I will say the United Pool Association has historically done a very good job of is really being selective who they let in. And part of the, you've met Steve Homer, his, getting a relationship going with you is such a good synergy because, it's the 80-20 rule. There's a lot of bad pool techs out there, but there's a lot of good ones. And we've just done a good job of finding the ones that are the good ones. And, so we do screen. I think, the folks that listen to you, they take their business seriously, and that's what we're looking for. And it provides the consistency. And that's the big thing is, being able to predict what your costs are going to be. And that is probably one of the biggest challenges in the insurance industry is what things are going to look like next year. And so what we've done is try to minimize that risk as much as possible by getting the right people in the program that are gonna look at it as something to preserve. We have had our rates flat for 5 years. I mean, that's not even. I mean, my coffee is like twice the price as it used to be 5 years ago. So it's not. And trust me, I love to pat myself on the back, but it's not that. It's the guys we have, that take their jobs very seriously. They take what they do seriously. They want to help their customers the best they can, and they have the highest retention, I'm sure, as far as their pools.
Yeah.
Your statement's correct. Absolutely.
So there's two different ways you can get the insurance with UPA. You can join a chapter, and they have meetings. You mentioned sick route coverage and vacation coverage is a benefit there. But you also open it up to my listeners by having just the insurance through an online kind of service where they have the insurance, but they're not part of a local, boots on the ground chapter. Is that a correct way of explaining?
It's yeah, absolutely correct. And I, being, keeping time in consideration, what I would share is that, there's two tracks. It's the chapter track and it's what we call a virtual chapter where your folks are. But I would throw out there that if any of your listeners, are in an area and, hey, they've got, 5 guys that, hey, we all meet at the supply houses all the time already, definitely reach out. I mean, can definitely start a chapter. This as well as your listeners. I mean, this is an aging demographic. The average age of the pool tech, is somewhere in the mid 40s, and it's trying to get these younger guys in there, the 20s and 30s, it's such a benefit to get them around the guys who've been doing this for 25 years. And I will tell you, David, never have I seen people more generous with their time than I have with these folks at the UPA. So it's, the young guys have just gleaned so much experience. And like you said earlier, the best to learn from other people's mistakes. And that's what these guys do is they try to pass that stuff on. But yeah, 2 tracks. It's the chapter format or joining virtually, which I know there's a link, I think, on your podcast.
Yeah.
Get that process started.
And I always tell people, not having insurance for your pool ride is like driving around with no car insurance, basically. And I was in an incident where I was backing out in a parking lot, and this guy was a scammer because he was backing out. He saw me backing out, so he backed his car into mine. It was late at night, and I knew exactly what happened because where I stopped was not far enough back to hit him if it was parked still. He pulled back in. And so my insurance company, I have Farmers Insurance, my agent's super experienced. He's like, this happens all the time. You could be at a red light, people could back into you. We see it all the time where people take advantage of you. He goes, don't worry, we'll fight this. Rest assured that this guy is not going to get this claim any money from you at all. And sure enough, 3 or 4 months later, it was settled as a no-fault accident. The guy didn't get anything. I didn't have to do anything. And so it worked out perfectly. But without that insurance with your pool route, if you were to spill acid on a driveway and it's $90,000, you're pretty much out of luck at that point.
You're out of luck. You're likely closing up shop. And what I would say is, if you think about all your expenses, this is, $64 a month. This is, people spend more now. I hate to say it, a Jack in a Box. It's a level of protection that if you take your business seriously, and again, I plug UPA. UPA is great, but even if it's not UPA, just do your business, do yourself, do your family a favor. Get the protection you need because your livelihoods depend on your business, and you end up. Again, the acid things are one thing, but God forbid you leave the gate open. Again, not to turn this morbid, but sadly there are fatality claims. There are claims that are not fatalities, but people who leave being permanently disabled, because of the risks having to do with the body of water, and so it's serious consequences to accidents, and insurance is almost like you just have to do it. If you ever run out of content, look, insurance tends to put people to sleep, but I'm happy to come back on whenever you need it.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks, Sean. And if you're looking to sign up for insurance, again, you can go to my website, swimmingpoollearning.com. In the web page itself, on the homepage, just scroll down, click on the UPA banner there, and that'll take you to the spreadsheet to sign up for the insurance. And you'll be notified within a few days to a week if you have been accepted. You can also find other podcasts on my website. Just click on the podcast icon, and you can actually find part 1 to this, where Sean talks about some horror stories in the insurance claims that he's received. And if you're looking for other podcasts, of course, I have over 1,800 podcasts there for you to listen to. And if you're interested in the coaching program that I offer, you can learn more at poolguycoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a great rest of your week. God bless. This episode is brought to you by HASA, providing products that deliver clean, healthy water for every aspect of everyday life. The bottom feeder battery-powered vacuum system, portable, powerful, and only weighs 12 pounds. And Skimmer. Get Skimmer, America's #1 pool service software. Podcast listeners can try Skimmer for free at getskimmer.com/poolguy.